Police officer laughs at black woman claiming to be a billionaire, then learns the hard truth. In a bustling corner of downtown Chicago, a single act of prejudice would soon turn the entire city on its head. It began as an ordinary day, but for Ebony Carter, nothing had felt ordinary in a long time, especially once she got stopped for a minor traffic issue. The responding officer, Bradley Moore, took one look at her worn-out sweatshirt and old car and stifled a laugh when she calmly mentioned she was a billionaire. Little did he know, Ebony's empire stretched farther than he could imagine. What started as a moment of scorn would unravel into a dramatic clash of ego, identity, and cold, hard truth. Ebony Carter's day began with a sense of anticipation. She had an early morning interview at a community center she was secretly funding, the Holbrook Foundation, situated on the southwest side of Chicago. Her philanthropic heart felt alive and humming with excitement. She had grown up in a neighborhood not too far from there, determined to make something of herself after a childhood spent in modest circumstances. Little did she know that on this day, her background and accomplishments would collide in a way that tested her patience, dignity, and sense of justice. Dressed in a pair of comfortable black leggings and a well-worn grey hoodie, Ebony looked far from the public image most would associate with a billionaire, and that was how she wanted it. She had no need to publicly display her wealth. Far more satisfying was her ability to move through life without being pigeonholed by the stereotypes of the ultra-rich. She wanted honest interactions, free from sycophants or opportunists, so she could direct her vast resources where they were truly needed. After glancing at her watch, a simple digital one rather than a lavish diamond-encrusted piece, she realized she was running late. Her Tesla was in the shop for a software update, so she had borrowed her cousin's older compact sedan. As she merged onto Lakeshore Drive, Ebony's phone buzzed with a text from her personal assistant, Maria Alvarez. "Call me ASAP, Holbrook Children's Wing, urgent." Ebony's mind briefly drifted, reading the message on the phone mounted on the dashboard. She quickly tried to draft a mental plan for the conversation. She did not notice the traffic light changing. By the time Ebony realized that the light had turned red, her foot jammed on the brake pedal and she skidded a few feet over the crosswalk line. It was a mild enough slip, but it caught the attention of a police cruiser parked nearby. Officer Bradley Moore, a new recruit with a crisp uniform and a determined ambition to climb the ranks fast, promptly switched on his lights. His partner, Officer Caroline Reeves, looked up from her own idle scanning of the road. They were searching for bigger offenses, but Ebony's momentary slip was enough for Moore to jump into action. Ebony pulled over, her heartbeat accelerating with the familiar anxiety that can accompany an encounter with law enforcement. Reassuring herself that she'd done nothing truly serious, she practiced the calm she'd honed through countless stressful negotiations in business deals, a measured breath, a polite smile, courtesy ready on her lips. Officer Moore strutted toward her driver's side window. He was tall, with closely cropped blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of permanent smirk that suggested an unearned sense of superiority. "License and registration," he demanded, leaning down just enough for Ebony to catch the faint odor of cheap cologne. "Sure, officer," Ebony replied. She handed over the documents, her expression polite but neutral. She understood the routine. Moore glanced at the documents and noticed the address. He raised an eyebrow. "You live in Lake Point Tower?" he asked skeptically, referencing one of Chicago's upscale residential buildings. "Long way from there to be tooling around in this old junker." Ebony smiled, used to being underestimated. "Yes, that's correct." Moore muttered something under his breath, walked back to his squad car, and ran a check. No warrants, no criminal record, nothing suspicious, yet he returned to Ebony with a certain disbelief coloring his words. "So you're Ebony Carter, born and raised on the South Side, I see. That's quite an address you have. Must be nice." The subtext was clear. "You don't look like you'd belong there." Ebony noticed his tone, but tried not to let it rattle her. She responded calmly, "It is nice, yes. I moved there recently." You some kind of YouTube influencer or something? Moore asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. She could have easily responded with the facts. She was a self-made billionaire, primarily through savvy tech investments and a few early stakes in startups that took off, one of which had merged with a Tesla supply partner. She'd worked her way through graduate school, endured discrimination at numerous financial firms, and still triumphed. But Ebony rarely led with that story. She looked the officer in the eye. "I'm an investor, and a philanthropist, actually." Moore scoffed. "Oh, really?" His voice was laced with a condescension that was quickly riling Ebony's nerves. "And how do you afford Lake Point Tower and this so-called philanthropy?" She took a breath. "Officer, I'm a billionaire. I can afford a lot of things." For a split second, Moore was speechless. Then a sneering laugh escaped his lips. "Right, sure. I see your old car, your hoodie, your scuffed sneakers, and you claim you're a billionaire?" He turned to his partner. "You hear that, Reeves? We've got a billionaire in the building." Ebony felt a flicker of anger, but tried to remain composed. She had been in boardrooms where executives twice her age had laughed in disbelief at her success, and she'd proven them wrong. The best approach was to stay polite, even if it tested every fiber of her patience. "I understand you might find that hard to believe," Ebony replied, trying to keep her tone civil. "But it's the truth." Moore simply shook his head. "Okay, Miss Billionaire. I'm going to write you a ticket for running that red light. You can pay your fine. If you're so rich, that shouldn't be a problem, and then you can move along." Ebony nodded, refusing to let his attitude sour her day completely. "That's fine. May I have my license and registration back?" "Sure," Moore said, handing the documents back with an exaggerated flourish. "You have yourself a wonderful day, Miss Billionaire." He strode back to the cruiser, took his time writing the ticket, and returned to place it in Ebony's hand with a parting smirk. She thanked him quietly, rolled up her window, and pulled away. Anger simmered beneath her calm demeanor. She had faced her fair share of prejudice in life, but something about Moore's derisive laughter got under her skin. Still, Ebony's day beckoned, and she had more important things to do. She took a deep breath and focused on the tasks ahead, unaware that this routine stop was just the beginning of a storm that would soon engulf them both. Ebony arrived at the Holbrook Foundation's new children's wing, a modest red brick building with bright murals on its exterior. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with new possibilities for after-school programs, library expansions, and tutoring initiatives. She was greeted warmly by Holbrook's director, Elaine Spencer, a middle-aged social worker who wore her passion on her sleeve. "Ebony, thank goodness you're here," Elaine exclaimed, guiding her down a hallway lined with half-unpacked boxes. Artwork, donated desks and brand-new chairs lay scattered about, awaiting final arrangement. "We have to finalize your philanthropic arrangement with us. The City Council has stepped in, and there are new guidelines for large donations that we need to comply with." Ebony grinned. "I'm happy to help. Just tell me what I need to do." They walked into a conference room where a small group of community members and administrators discussed logistics. Ebony set down her purse, carefully placed the speeding ticket from Officer Moore inside, and joined the meeting. Part of her mind still swirled with frustration over the encounter, but she forced herself to focus on the work at hand, helping the children who needed it most. Elaine began by reviewing their finances, explaining how Ebony's donation would fund staff salaries, a technology upgrade, and new sports equipment. They spoke about the significance of the children's wing. It wasn't just a building, it was a beacon of hope for families. Ebony nodded, visualizing the transformations that were about to take place, from tutoring in math and science to after-school art programs that fostered creativity. Time flew in the meeting, and before long, Ebony realized it was late afternoon. Elaine was about to launch into a discussion about expanding the facility's mentorship program when Ebony's assistant, Maria Alvarez, quietly entered. "Ebony, I'm sorry to interrupt," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "You really need to see this. Something's blowing up online." Ebony excused herself and stepped into the hallway, away from prying ears. Maria handed over her phone. "Take a look at these local social media pages," she said. Apparently, an officer bragged about pulling over a woman who claimed to be a billionaire. "It's going viral, and they're making all sorts of jokes." Ebony's stomach tightened. She shouldn't have been surprised. In an era where everyone's phone is always out, a moment of ridicule could spread like wildfire, especially when it played into stereotypes. She read through the posts. There were tweets mocking the idea of a billionaire in an old car, memes featuring random images of battered vehicles with captions like, "I'm totally a billionaire." Her mind replayed the face of Officer Moore, that mocking grin. She felt waves of embarrassment mixed with indignation, but she quickly reminded herself that she'd survived far worse. She had the means to handle this, legally, financially, or otherwise. Yet Ebony was reluctant to stoop to revenge without a worthy reason. "What do you want to do?" Maria asked, scanning Ebony's expression for a decision. Ebony exhaled slowly, her frustration mingling with a stoic acceptance. "For now, nothing. Let's not feed the trolls, but keep an eye on it and send me all relevant links." Maria nodded. Ebony felt the warmth of her assistant's supportive presence. Though Ebony had all the resources in the world, she valued loyalty and real human connection above all. Returning to the meeting, Ebony tried to bury her immediate annoyance and focus on the philanthropic mission at hand. That was who she was, after all, someone who rose above petty battles to address larger issues. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if Officer Moore would face consequences for not only ridiculing her, but also potentially feeding the public a skewed narrative that might incite more negativity or even danger. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The humiliating headlines spreading online would soon become a catalyst for something far bigger. Life had a way of weaving intricate tapestries from the threads of small encounters, and this one run-in with a smug officer was about to become a turning point in both of their lives. While Ebony Carter was wrapping up her meeting at the Holbrook Foundation, Officer Bradley Moore was sitting in a cramped office at the 12th Precinct, scrolling through the same social media posts. He wore a grin that fluctuated between pride and apprehension. He had posted a brief, cryptic status about his day, "Pulled over a driver claiming to be a billionaire. Funniest thing I've heard in weeks. Stop lying, arch officers know best." Within hours, that single post had been reshared, retweeted, and screen-grabbed. Some people cheered him on, showering the comment section with assumptions and jokes, often tinged with more than a hint of racism and classism. Others criticized him, suggesting that his mocking tone was unprofessional and bigoted. But Moore was riding the high of attention. It felt like the entire city was reading about him. He wanted to stand out, to make a name for himself in the Chicago Police Department. Unlike other rookie officers who started their careers humbly, Moore was hungry for recognition and promotion. So far, he'd built his profile by volunteering for social media engagement initiatives and being the face of the precinct's youth outreach programs, though ironically, he wasn't very empathetic in real-life encounters, especially with minority communities. His partner, Officer Caroline Reeves, observed him from across the desk. She was older, more experienced, and definitely more cautious. "You realize this could come back to bite you, right?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Moore shrugged. "It's just a harmless joke. People are blowing it out of proportion." Reeves sighed. "You and I both know that public perception matters. If that woman is actually wealthy or well-connected, she could cause you problems, or the department problems." Moore brushed off the warning. "Look, I ran her license, Ebony Carter. She's got no major business ties listed that I can see. She's just putting on airs. And if she's actually rich," he added with a snort, "why was she driving such a beat-up car, wearing clothes that looked like they came from a thrift store?" Reeves shook her head but held her tongue. She'd only been partnered with Moore for a month, yet she'd seen the bristling arrogance that simmered under his clean-cut demeanor. He rarely took advice from peers. He was fixated on becoming a detective as quickly as possible, and from there, who knew, maybe a path to a higher political office or at least a high-ranking position within law enforcement. Back at his phone, Moore's grin widened as he noticed local news outlets picking up the story. One headline read, "Officer's social media post mocks alleged billionaire motorist." Another article asked, "Humor or harassment?" debating the CPD's viral post. The negativity didn't bother Moore too much. He believed in the old adage that any press is good press, as long as they spelled his name right. This might just be the publicity that elevated him to the public eye. Maybe city officials would notice him. A short while later, Moore found himself called into his lieutenant's office. Lieutenant Karen Bowman, a stern but fair leader, glared at him from behind a stack of paperwork. "Officer Moore," she began, "your social media post has caused a bit of a stir. We've received calls from community advocacy groups, some of whom claim your comment was disrespectful. I understand free speech, but you need to be mindful of department policy and the image we project." Moore nodded, feigning contrition. "I apologize, Lieutenant. It was just a joke. I didn't mean any harm." Bowman studied him carefully, her dark eyes searching for sincerity. "Be that as it may, you've opened a door you might not be ready to walk through. Public scrutiny can be fierce, especially in a city like Chicago, and we don't need more friction with the community. Tread carefully, officer." Moore nodded again. He was well versed in the art of superficial compliance. As soon as he left Bowman's office, his composure slipped back into the smug grin. He remained convinced he had nothing to worry about. After all, Ebony Carter was just an ordinary woman. He told himself she had to be. And if she was indeed a billionaire, well, maybe that would just add more excitement to his rising profile. One thing was sure. Moore's ambition was a powder keg waiting for a spark. He had no clue that Ebony Carter's real identity was about to ignite an explosion that would rock every assumption he held about power, wealth, and accountability. And by the time the truth emerged, the repercussions would be far greater than a slap on the wrist or a viral social media post. In the days following her traffic stop, Ebony did her best to focus on her philanthropic work while ignoring the incessant chatter online. But the whispers had grown into a roar. She found that even her personal philanthropic circle had heard about the incident. Emails poured in from colleagues, friends, and other philanthropists, curious if she was the woman at the center of the fiasco. Some expressed outrage on her behalf, others offered legal support. Ebony found the whole ordeal draining, but she refused to be consumed by negativity. Her approach was straightforward: handle business as usual. She had a meeting scheduled with her attorneys at Quinn Price, a well-known Chicago law firm, to finalize property deeds for a new community recreation center near Bronzeville. After that, she'd head to a working lunch at the Chicago Civic and Social Club to discuss an entrepreneurship program for underprivileged youth. Still, the drama trailed her like a persistent shadow. Even in the sleek offices of Quinn Price, Ebony sensed the low hum of curiosity when staff recognized her name from the tabloids. Seated in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the Chicago River, Ebony faced two of the firm's partners, Richard Quinn and Angela Price. They were wrapping up the usual small talk when Angela delicately broached the viral topic. "Ebony, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this," Angela began, adjusting her glasses. "We've seen the coverage about that police officer who pulled you over. Are you all right? Do you need any legal counsel about defamation or harassment?" Ebony offered a polite smile, though she felt a slight twist in her stomach. She was tired of the subject. "I appreciate your concern. At this point, I'm not pursuing legal action. But if things escalate, I may need your help." Richard nodded. "Understood. It's unfortunate how quickly these situations can spiral. Let's hope it settles down." "Well, let's move on to the property deeds," Ebony said, shifting gears. Her philanthropic acquisitions required meticulous attention. Despite her vast fortune, she was hands-on with all her endeavors. It was part of her pride and her method, ensuring every penny went exactly where it should. After combing through documents and discussing the final steps to secure the recreation center, Ebony felt the tension in her chest start to ease. She reminded herself that her real work, uplifting communities, mattered far more than any passing social media storm. Yet fate had other plans. As Ebony stepped out of the law firm's lobby, phone in hand, she glanced at a new message from Maria. "Check local news. They know you're the billionaire from the viral post." Ebony's finger hovered over the link, her heartbeat quickening. She tapped the news clip from WGN-TV. A stern-faced anchor described how an anonymous insider had confirmed Ebony's identity as the woman in question. The segment replayed part of Officer Moore's now infamous post, followed by a brief mention of Ebony's philanthropic record, her name on scholarship programs, her donations to local shelters, and rumored expansions of her philanthropic empire. The anchor concluded, "One has to wonder if Ebony Carter is indeed a billionaire, as she's rumored to be, or just a very wealthy investor. Either way, her contributions to Chicago's underserved communities are significant." Ebony exhaled, her mind racing. She had spent years carefully maintaining a low profile, believing that her deeds spoke louder than her bank balance. But now the cat was out of the bag. Would her philanthropic efforts be overshadowed by superficial gossip? An uneasy feeling pooled in her gut. She knew that once the media spotlight fixed on her, there could be unpredictable consequences. It was no longer a private matter of an officer's condescending attitude. It was now a public spectacle that threatened to overshadow her life's work. She texted Maria, "Meet me at the Chicago Civic and Social Club in 20 minutes. We need a strategy." Ebony slipped her phone into her purse, determination surging. If the world wanted to pry into her life, so be it. She'd handle it with grace and strength, just like every other obstacle. But Officer Moore's condescension had sown seeds of revelation. Soon everyone would know exactly who Ebony Carter really was, and once that truth came out, Ebony silently hoped that more good could come from it than harm. The next moves would require a delicate balance of public relations, legal foresight, and unwavering confidence. She was about to teach a critical lesson, that underestimating someone, anyone, might cost dearly, especially when that person has both unimaginable resources and a mission to wield them for greater change. As the story of Ebony Carter's run-in with Officer Moore continued to spread, a grassroots ripple effect stirred in various Chicago neighborhoods. People who had personally benefited from Ebony's philanthropy found themselves swapping anecdotes about her kindness and generosity. In Bronzeville, mothers whose children participated in her tutoring program spoke up on community forums, lauding Ebony for never seeking attention or accolades. In Englewood, church volunteers recalled how she quietly funded a soup kitchen's renovations. Meanwhile, the city's activists and social justice groups took note of the situation, recognizing in Ebony a symbol for something larger. The unfair judgments passed on individuals, particularly black women, based on outward appearances. "This is systemic prejudice on display," they argued, pointing out how Ebony's claims of wealth were mocked by a public servant with little justification besides her modest dress and old car. Suddenly, Ebony's name became a rallying cry, not because she was an underdog, her net worth was astronomical after all, but because her experience highlighted how ingrained biases could overshadow reality. Twitter threads debated the ethics of the police officers' actions, with many calling for disciplinary measures. Some progressive politicians weighed in, eager to align themselves with Ebony's philanthropic reputation. Others, especially Moore's supporters, insisted that anyone could say they're a billionaire, and that Moore's reaction was just everyday skepticism. But Ebony had no intention of basking in this polarized spotlight. Instead, she spent her days quietly working on new projects. One such initiative was the Carter Tech Incubator, a program aimed at helping young adults from lower-income backgrounds learn coding, cybersecurity, and data analysis. Scheduled to open in a few months, It promised scholarships, mentorship programs, and potential job placements at tech firms across the city. Yet the more Ebony tried to focus on her mission, the more she was pulled into the vortex of publicity. It reached a tipping point one sunny afternoon when a local reporter, Sasha Brown, ambushed Ebony outside the Holbrook Foundation's children's wing. A camera operator hurried behind, capturing every second. "Ms. Carter, Miss Carter," Sasha called out. "Can we have a moment of your time?" Ebony paused, forcing a courteous smile. She recognized Sasha as a reporter known for her balanced takes. If she had to speak to the media, Sasha was a safer bet than many others who sensationalized every angle. "Just a few questions," Sasha continued, microphone held up. "Could you share how you feel about the viral reaction to your traffic stop with Officer Moore?" Ebony hesitated. She disliked being in the spotlight, but ignoring the press would be unwise. She swallowed once, then spoke in a measured tone. "I believe the reaction underscores how quickly we judge each other based on appearances. My hope is that instead of fixating on me, people will turn their attention to the work that needs to be done in our communities." Sasha pressed on. "Are you indeed a billionaire?" Ebony's lips twitched in a half-smile. "I'm fortunate to have more than I ever dreamed of, and I believe in using those resources for good. The specifics of my net worth aren't what's important. It's about the impact we can make." "And do you have any message for Officer Moore or the Chicago Police Department?" Ebony took a breath, recalling Moore's smug grin. She refused to sound bitter. "I understand skepticism. People can doubt me if they like. But I'd encourage all of us, especially those in positions of authority, to remember that respect goes both ways. I hold no ill will toward Officer Moore, but I do hope this situation sparks a conversation about assumptions and fairness." Sasha nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Carter." In the hours that followed, that short interview circulated online. Some people applauded Ebony's grace. Others twisted her words, accusing her of painting the police as inherently biased. The city's tension simmered, occasionally flaring in heated online debates. Unbeknownst to Ebony, other significant developments were taking place. Private investigators hired by tabloids were digging into her past, sifting through her business records and trying to confirm her net worth. Rival philanthropists, more concerned with social prestige than real change, saw a chance to overshadow Ebony's philanthropic accomplishments, and behind the walls of the 12th Precinct, Officer Moore was doing everything he could to defend himself, rallying sympathetic voices and seeking the endorsement of influential figures. But Ebony would not be deterred. She pressed forward, finalizing the Carter Tech Incubator's lease agreements, coordinating with local leaders to identify talented youth for the program, and steadily ignoring the swirl of scandal. Little did she know, fate was orchestrating events that would soon throw her and Officer Moore into a direct confrontation, one that would peel back the layers of pretense and force the hard truth into the open. Located in a refurbished brick warehouse in the heart of Bronzeville, the Carter Tech Incubator was Ebony's crown jewel of community development. Glass panels, open workspaces, and vibrant murals reflected the innovative spirit she hoped to cultivate in local youth. Even before its official opening, the incubator garnered buzz among aspiring entrepreneurs and tech-savvy teens. One late afternoon, Ebony arrived at the site to finalize interior details, where the brand-new computers would go, how to structure the breakout rooms, and to confirm the schedule for her volunteer instructors. She was going over a blueprint with her head contractor, a burly man named Marcus DeLong, when her assistant, Maria, rushed in, breathless. "Ebony, we've got a serious problem," Maria said, voice shaking. "One of our suppliers just backed out. The 3D printers and new software, poof, cancelled." "What?" Ebony furrowed her brow in confusion. "We already paid for part of that shipment." Marcus rubbed his jaw, stepping aside to let them talk. Ebony lowered her voice, though frustration seeped in. "Why would they cancel?" Maria glanced nervously at Marcus before replying. They claim it's a business decision, but I've been hearing rumors that someone advised them not to partner with you, something about negative publicity. Ebony's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. It was no secret that some corners of the tech world were notoriously fickle or even quietly prejudiced. But was the negative publicity around Officer Moore's mocking post enough to spook them? Or was there a more direct, orchestrated campaign against her? She took a steadying breath, focusing on solutions. All right, we'll find another supplier. Spread the word, see if we can expedite a new order from a different source. I can call in some favors if needed. Maria nodded. I'll get right on it, but Ebony, I'm worried this might just be the start. Ebony set her jaw. We'll handle it. The incubator will open on schedule, no matter what. Their conversation was cut short by Marcus calling Ebony over. Ms. Carter, we have an issue with the electrical wiring in the southwestern corner. We'll need an inspector to come in. Ebony sighed. Okay, let's get them here tomorrow if possible. We can't afford delays. Maria walked off, phone in hand, while Ebony followed Marcus to review the wiring plan. But the sense of unease gnawing at her stomach persisted. Someone, somewhere, was pulling strings to disrupt her philanthropic efforts. And if that was the case, Ebony had a suspicion about who might be behind it. Across town at the 12th Precinct, Officer Moore was caught in his own whirlwind of controversy. He was being grilled by none other than Lieutenant Bowman, who had just come from a tense meeting with city officials. The mention of Ebony Carter's philanthropic works had escalated the stakes. Ebony wasn't just any private citizen. She was a major donor to various city programs. What in the world were you thinking, Moore? Lieutenant Bowman snapped, pacing the small office. Chicago's mayor has heard about this, and so have multiple aldermen who rely on Miss Carter's donations. You're putting a target on our department's back. Moore tried to maintain a semblance of composure. Look, I didn't know who she was. People lie all the time during traffic stops. Plus, I didn't harass her, okay? I pulled her over for running a light. That's not the issue here, Moore. It's your attitude, your mocking post that went viral. We do not need this headache. Bowman paused, rubbing her temples. Honestly, if she files a complaint, or if the community continues to rally behind her, you could be looking at disciplinary action. If Ms. Carter decides to press defamation or some other legal angle, we're in a tough spot. Moore swallowed. So what do you want me to do? Apologize, Bowman spat out. A sincere public apology. Try to meet with Mrs. Carter, or at least issue a statement, something to de-escalate this. The brass wants you to do it ASAP. Moore clenched his jaw. The idea of publicly eating crow set his teeth on edge, but as he saw Bowman's steely gaze, he realized he had little choice. Yes, ma'am. I'll handle it. That evening, Moore pored over social media again, now seeing a different angle. Ebony Carter's philanthropic background was overshadowing his narrative. People sympathized with her. They criticized him for ridiculing a person who not only had wealth, but also used it for good. Moore's attempt at humor had turned into a full-blown fiasco. He mulled over his next steps. The department wanted a bland, corporate-sounding apology, but Moore wanted to be strategic. He knew Ebony had resources, influence, and a blossoming public sympathy. In a moment of twisted logic, he decided that the best defense was a good offense. Perhaps, if he could find a way to poke holes in her philanthropic record, he could salvage his reputation by painting her as a fraud or exaggerator. Late into the night, Moore called in a favor from a friend who had some connections in investigative circles. He gleaned what he could about Ebony's philanthropic empire. He found nothing overtly scandalous. No pending lawsuits, no questionable dealings. On the contrary, Ebony's record was fairly immaculate. That only fueled his suspicion. No one is that perfect, he thought. Fueled by desperation and pride, he started contacting local businesses and organizations that had partnered with Ebony. He posed as a concerned citizen, a journalist, and even an off-duty officer, fishing for any rumor that might discredit her. Most people lauded Ebony's sincerity and generosity, Yet a handful had only vague negative impressions, like the tech supplier who recently backed out of a deal, citing reputational risks. Moore seized on that. Maybe, just maybe, Ebony had skeletons in her closet that he could exploit. His vendetta was a risky gambit. It had little official support and could easily blow up in his face. But in his mind, Moore believed that if he could paint Ebony as a deceptive figure who'd used wealth to manipulate people, then he could justify his actions during the traffic stop. To him, this was his path to redemption. And so, Moore plunged deeper into a misguided crusade, unaware of the storm he was conjuring. As Ebony worked tirelessly to launch her incubator, and the city's eye of scrutiny hovered over both of them, the collision course was set. When the dust finally settled, neither Ebony nor Moore would escape unscathed, but karma has a keen sense of timing, and the lessons in store were about to transform everything they thought they knew. 1 week later, Ebony felt the tension ratchet up another notch. In the morning, she received a barrage of messages from community leaders and donors expressing confusion about what they'd heard from an unidentified source who was calling Ebony's philanthropic practices into question. That same afternoon, Ebony learned that another supplier had mysteriously cancelled their agreement with the Carter Tech Incubator, citing conflicting schedules. The cancellations, the rumors, there was a pattern, and Ebony suspected that Officer Moore might be behind it, perhaps in a clumsy attempt at vengeance or reputation repair. But she didn't yet have proof. Still, Ebony was no stranger to adversity. She'd learned long ago that to defeat unseen attacks, you needed a solid team. She called her lawyers at Quinn Price, then reached out to a private investigator she'd occasionally hired to vet large business deals. Together, they began gathering information to find out who was behind these whispers. That evening, Ebony was supposed to attend a community panel at City Hall, organized by a local council member who admired her philanthropic work. The panel aimed to discuss bridging tech opportunities for underprivileged areas, showcasing Ebony's incubator as an example. Naturally, the press was invited. And naturally, Ebony knew there would be questions about her run-in with the police and about the rumors swirling in the media. Dressed in a sharp burgundy blazer and matching heels, Ebony arrived at City Hall with Maria by her side. She felt a wave of flashlights, camera shutters and microphones. Instead of scurrying past, Ebony stood tall and offered a polite smile. "I'll address questions after the panel," she told the reporters, maintaining a calm exterior. But inside, her emotions were on a tightrope. She spotted Sasha Brown from WGN-TV, giving Ebony a small nod of acknowledgement. Ebony nodded back. The panel went smoothly at first. Ebony presented her vision, using her tech incubator to equip young minds with the skills needed to thrive in a modern economy. She highlighted the success stories from her pilot programs, the real-life experiences of kids who found their passion in coding or engineering. Then, during the Q&A, one journalist lobbed a loaded question. "Ms. Carter, certain rumors suggest your philanthropic organizations aren't fully transparent. How do you respond to allegations that your donations come with strings attached and that suppliers are dropping out due to undisclosed issues?" Ebony froze for half a beat. Her heart raced. She'd spent years building a philanthropic empire with integrity and open financial records. "I'm not sure where these allegations are coming from," she replied, her voice steady. "All our financials are audited regularly, and we have a track record of accountability. Any supplier dropping out does so of their own volition, but we welcome open dialogue. Our door is always open for collaboration and clarity." From the corner of her eye, Ebony saw a figure slip into the back of the room. Her stomach twisted when she recognized Officer Moore in plain clothes, leaning against the wall with crossed arms. Their eyes locked for a moment, and she saw that same smirk from the day he'd written her a ticket. A city official on the panel cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. Let's move to the next question." And so the panel continued. But the mood had shifted. A crackle of tension pulsed in the air. When the event ended, Ebony found her way through the throng of people, only to sense someone hovering behind. She turned to see Officer Moore, an almost triumphant glint in his eye. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice low. "Surprised to see me?" Ebony mustered her composure. "Not particularly." He took a step closer. "I hear a couple of your suppliers have jumped ship. Tough break." She stiffened. "Is there something you want, Officer Moore? Because I have nothing to say to you outside a legal context." Moore's lips curved into a condescending smile. "Careful, Miss Billionaire. Not everything is about money and power. Sometimes a reality check can do wonders." He turned to leave but paused. "The press wants a story, and I'm sure they'll keep digging." Ebony stared after him, anger pulsing in her veins. She'd been threatened in subtle ways by ruthless businessmen before, but never by a police officer who was supposed to protect the public. Her fists tightened at her sides. She was more certain than ever that Moore was behind the smear campaign. It wasn't just about pride anymore. He was actively sabotaging a project that could change hundreds of lives in the community. That night, Ebony couldn't sleep. She paced her penthouse in Lake Point Tower, the glittering skyline doing little to soothe her. Eventually, she opened her laptop, scanning through the incubator's finances and supplier contracts, searching for any clue that could link Moore to the sabotage. Her phone buzzed. It was Maria. "Ebony," her assistant said softly, "I don't like this. Moore's harassment has gone too far. Are you sure you don't want to file a formal complaint?" Ebony sighed heavily. "Not yet. I want solid proof before we involve the authorities or the media. Otherwise, it'll look like I'm just trying to retaliate. But if I find evidence—" Maria's voice brimmed with concern. "You will. And when you do, don't hesitate." After they hung up, Ebony stared at her reflection in the glass, the city's lights shimmering. She whispered to herself, "I fought too long and hard to get here. I'm not backing down." The confrontation had rattled her, but it also fueled her resolve. The lines were drawn. No matter what Moore tried, Ebony was determined to defend her name and her mission. In the process, she would prove that beneath the hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, and the unassuming demeanor was a formidable force, one that neither ignorance nor malice could break. While Ebony and her team strategized, Officer Moore was feeling the heat at the precinct. Lieutenant Bowman had pressured him to issue an apology, but Moore stalled, claiming he was gathering more information for a thorough statement. In truth, he was anxious. The sabotage efforts had grown messy, and Ebony Carter seemed more resilient than expected. That tension spilled over one day when Ebony, accompanied by Dennis, came to the 12th precinct in person. She had an appointment with an internal affairs officer who had shown interest in Ebony's claims. As Ebony passed by Moore's desk, she felt his eyes drilling into her. The smugness was gone, replaced with cold hostility. Later, in a private interview room, Ebony met Sergeant Barbara Fielding, a no-nonsense internal affairs investigator. Ebony presented her case calmly, detailing the smear campaign and her strong belief that Moore was involved. She submitted the phone call transcripts, testimonies, and the suspicious alias, Brad Martin. Sergeant Fielding listened intently, asking pointed questions. "I'll look into this," she said, her tone neutral. "But this is a serious accusation. If Moore is involved, there will be consequences." Outside the station, Ebony exhaled, the crisp Chicago air filling her lungs. She stood with Dennis, who gave a supportive nod. "We've done what we can," he said. "Now it's in their hands." Ebony watched the station's doors. "He thinks he can bully me into silence," she murmured. "He's about to learn I'm not so easily intimidated." The seeds of Moore's downfall were planted. Yet Ebony also knew that systems can be slow, and justice is not always swift. The upcoming days would be crucial. And in the background, Ebony had a grand opening to prepare for, an event that would either confirm her as a visionary philanthropist or turn into a public relations disaster if Moore's sabotage continued to unfold. At last, the day arrived for the Carter Tech Incubator's grand opening. The interior renovations were complete, the technology station set up. Though Ebony had faced supplier cancellations, she'd found alternative partners willing to expedite shipments at a higher cost. But Ebony didn't flinch. This was a moment she wouldn't allow to be destroyed by petty vendettas. Outside the refurbished warehouse, a small crowd gathered under a large banner that read, "Carter Tech Incubator, empowering the innovators of tomorrow." Neighborhood families, local officials, journalists, and volunteers waited eagerly for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ebony, flanked by Maria and Dennis, greeted people with a warm smile, though her stomach felt like a tangle of nerves. Speeches began under a bright Chicago sun. Alderman Jonas Perry praised Ebony's work, emphasizing how the incubator promised to bridge the digital divide for our youth. A local pastor offered a short prayer for the center's success. Then it was Ebony's turn. She wore a simple black suit, standing behind the podium with poise. "I grew up not far from here," she said, voice steady despite the jitters. "I know firsthand how talent and ambition often go undiscovered without proper resources. This incubator is my way of investing in all the brilliant minds that deserve a chance to shine right here in Chicago's South Side." Applause rippled through the crowd. Ebony spotted news cameras rolling, capturing her every word. Among them, she recognized Sasha Brown from WGN and reporters from the Chicago Tribune, yet her gaze shifted to a figure standing further back, nearly blending with onlookers. Officer Moore. He stood there in uniform, arms folded, face unreadable. Ebony felt a surge of unease, but pressed on. She concluded her speech with a heartfelt thanks to the community and cut the ribbon with a flourish of oversized scissors. Cameras flashed, cheers erupted. The Carter Tech Incubator was officially open. But as Ebony moved to greet guests, she noticed Moore stepping forward. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The journalists quickly took note, cameras pivoting to capture what could be a confrontation. "Ms. Carter," he called out, "a moment, please." The chatter hushed. Ebony squared her shoulders, determined to keep her composure. "Officer Moore," she acknowledged calmly. Moore approached, pulling something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. He cleared his throat. I've come to read a statement from the Chicago Police Department." Ebony's heartbeat fluttered. Was he about to publicly apologize or double down on his accusations? Moore unfolded the paper, his voice stiff. "The CPD wishes to convey its support for the Carter Tech Incubator and Ms. Ebony Carter's philanthropic endeavors. Any misunderstandings or social media posts regarding Mrs. Carter's credibility were not representative of the department's stance. We regret any unintended harm these statements may have caused." Silence enveloped the crowd. Moore swallowed hard, glancing at Ebony. "On a personal note," he continued, "I'd like to say that I'm sorry for any disrespect I showed you, Miss Carter. It was never my intention to question your commitment to this community." Ebony maintained a neutral expression, though inside she was stunned. The cameras rolled, capturing Moore's measured apology. A few people clapped politely, though the tension remained palpable. With that, Moore stuffed the statement back into his pocket and started to leave. But Ebony, perhaps feeling a spark of compassion despite everything, stepped forward. "Officer Moore, I appreciate the apology," she said, voice clear. "And I hope we can all learn from this. Our city thrives when we work together, free of assumptions and prejudice." Moore paused, nodded once, and strode away without another word. The crowd's buzz resumed, cameras panning back to Ebony for reactions. The rest of the event proceeded with tours of the new facility, technology demonstrations, and a small luncheon. Yet Ebony couldn't shake the feeling that Moore's apology, while a public gesture, did not erase his attempts to sabotage her project. He's only apologizing because he was forced to, she thought. But maybe this is the end of his interference. Unknown to both Ebony and Moore, internal affairs had progressed in their investigation. Sergeant Fielding had cross-referenced phone records and was closing in on definitive proof linking Moore to the Brad Martin calls. The official apology might have bought him some time, but the wheels of accountability were still in motion. For the moment, Ebony allowed herself to bask in the grand opening's success. Children and teenagers roamed the incubator's halls, eyes alight with excitement. Community leaders lauded Ebony, praising her resilience and generosity. If this was a victory, it felt sweeter for having overcome adversity. But Ebony knew the final chapter had yet to be written. She could sense it in the air, a gathering storm waiting to test her resolve once more. 2 weeks after the grand opening, Ebony received a phone call from Sergeant Fielding. "Miss Carter, I have updates regarding your allegations against Officer Moore," Fielding said, her tone businesslike. "I think you'll want to come down to the station." Ebony arrived with Dennis, tension coiling inside her like a spring. Fielding met them in a private office, sliding a folder across the desk. "We've reviewed phone records, subpoenaed by a judge, and matched the burner phone's call logs to times when Officer Moore was off duty," Fielding explained. "We also have testimony from one of the suppliers. A trace on the voice recordings matched an electronic signature on Moore's police file. There's enough evidence to strongly indicate that he orchestrated the sabotage efforts against your incubator." Ebony closed her eyes for a moment, relief and anger mixing in her chest. Finally, she had concrete proof. "Thank you," Ebony said softly. "What happens now?" "Internal Affairs will recommend disciplinary action," Fielding replied. "This can range from suspension to possible termination. We're also forwarding the evidence to the state's attorney if you want to press charges for harassment or defamation." Ebony's mind swirled. Pressing charges could be lengthy, expensive, and emotionally draining, even for someone with her resources. But part of her believed Moore should face real consequences, not just a departmental slap on the wrist. Dennis leaned in. "You can also file a civil suit, Ebony. You have the resources, and it could set a precedent." Fielding added gently, "It might also send a message that no one is above the law. It's your choice." That evening, Ebony stood by her penthouse window, city lights shimmering below. She held the thick folder of evidence. The prospect of legal battles weighed heavily on her. She'd rather focus on the incubator and her philanthropic work. But Moore's actions had nearly derailed her project. Who was to say he wouldn't strike again, or that others wouldn't follow in his footsteps? By midnight, Ebony made her decision. She instructed her attorneys to file a civil suit against Moore for harassment, defamation, and any related damages to her philanthropic endeavors. She also consented to share her case with the state's attorney's office, should they decide to pursue criminal charges. The fallout was swift. The next morning, local papers and news channels broke the story. Officer accused of sabotaging billionaire philanthropist's community project. The 12th Precinct faced a storm of criticism, with city officials calling for stricter oversight of police conduct. Lieutenant Bowman and Sergeant Fielding both made statements condemning Moore's actions, emphasizing that he did not represent the department's values. Moore, blindsided by the formal charges and public outcry, found himself suspended pending an internal hearing. His supporters evaporated in the face of damning evidence. He tried to mount a defense, claiming Ebony's wealth had set him up, but the phone records and witness testimonies told a different story. As Ebony watched the coverage, she felt a mixture of triumph and sorrow. She hadn't wanted to be at war with law enforcement, but Moore's arrogance and malice had forced her hand. Ultimately, the truth would win out, and justice, she hoped, would be done. The legal process spanned several weeks. Ebony's attorneys handled most of the heavy lifting, but she appeared in court for key hearings. Moore attempted to negotiate an out-of-court settlement at first, but Ebony refused. She insisted on a formal judgment. She wanted accountability, not just hush money. Throughout the proceedings, more details emerged. Emails from Moore's personal account to certain suppliers highlighted threats of police scrutiny. Phone call recordings validated the link between the burner phone and Moore's home address. Even Moore's partner, Officer Caroline Reeves, testified that Moore had privately gloated about discrediting Ebony. The judge, a stern woman named Anita Clark, found Moore's actions deliberate, malicious, and reflective of gross misconduct. The court ruled in Ebony's favor, awarding her not just compensation for damages, but also punitive damages, given Moore's abuse of his position as a police officer. Moore was terminated from the CPD and faced a possible criminal case for harassment and misconduct. When the verdict was announced, Ebony felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had refused to be silenced or intimidated, and the law, this time, had upheld her rights. Outside the courthouse, journalists peppered her with questions. She answered calmly, "My hope is that this case serves as a reminder. No one is above accountability. We can't let prejudice or power plays hinder progress in our communities. I bear Officer Moore no personal ill will, but justice needed to be served." The city buzzed with the news. Community members who supported Ebony praised her for standing up against discrimination. Others saw it as a step in the right direction for police reform. The Carter Tech Incubator, meanwhile, soared in popularity with dozens of new applicants, fresh grant offers, and partnerships that flourished once the tarnish of Moore's sabotage had been removed. Moore, on the other hand, found himself ostracized. His once boasted ambitions lay in ruins. Friends turned their backs, and potential employers balked at his record. The man who had laughed at Ebony's claim of being a billionaire had destroyed his own future in the process. If karma had a face, it was that of Ebony Carter, triumphant, graceful, and unwavering. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of resilience, accountability, and hope. Ebony Carter's story shows how one act of discrimination can ignite a chain of events that tests our character, but also reveals our strength. Despite being mocked and undermined, Ebony rose above it all to transform adversity into fuel for her community and for justice. If there's one thing we can take away, it's that true worth isn't found in flashy displays, but in the impact we make on others, and that the truth always finds a way to come out. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring tales, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue shining a spotlight on stories that remind us of the power of perseverance and doing what's right. Thank you for watching.